Hello, and welcome to Show Me History. I'm your host, Amy Blankenship. The Switzer Candy story is a real-life example of the American dream. Immigrating from Ireland to the poor Carey Patch area of St. Louis to mansions in Webster Groves and Kirkwood, this is truly a story of rags to riches. A story of two families, both starting in Ireland, immigrating to America, and finding their way to St. Louis. The Switzer Candy Company sprang from the Murphy and Switzer families making candy in their Carey Patch kitchen. So let's begin with some family history, the background of our episode. So Michael Switzer was born in 1827 in County Limerick, Ireland. The family had originated from Palatine, so that's kind of current-day Germany. They migrated to England in 1709 with intentions of going to America. But due to some bureaucratic red tape, their journey was canceled and they were sidetracked to Ireland. The original name of the family was Switzer with a SCHW, and in 1745 it was changed to Switzer, the spelling that we're familiar with, SWITZER. In the summer of 1851, Michael Switzer immigrated to America. At the time, Ireland was a very poor country recovering but still suffering from the potato famine of the 1840s. Once in the States, Michael worked various jobs while traveling westward. In 1857, he married Margaret Morgan, an Irish immigrant from County Tipperary. They established their life in St. Louis, the Carey Patch, the Irish part of town. In St. Louis, Michael worked on the levee. On September 8, 1865, Michael passed away. Reports state he was drinking on a job unloading a steamer and fell into the Mississippi River and drowned. He left behind his wife Margaret and 4 children ranging in age from 6 years old to 1 month old. Frederick had been just a few weeks old before his father died. The other children were Mary Ellen, Catherine, and Margaret. As sole breadwinner, Mother Margaret sold groceries to support her family. Eventually, she was able to open a small store in the Carey Patch. Okay, so we're going to leave the Switzer family story there for a minute. We're going to jump over to the Murphys. So prior to the Great Potato Famine, Bernard Murphy moved from Belfast to Dublin, Ireland. There, he met Catherine Everhart. In 1840, they opened a shop on Capel Street selling cakes and candies. So despite the country being amid a famine and a potato blight, the shop did really well. Most of the residents of Dublin were landed gentry and still had funds for luxuries like sweets. Within a few years, they opened up 2 additional stores. They were dubbed Murphy's Belfast Confectionery. In 1849, Bernard died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving Catherine head of the family and business. Their youngest son, Joseph, was only 2 when his father passed away. He grew up in the candy business, learning all aspects of the trade. In his teens, he became very involved in the Irish national movement, the Fenians. They were, quote, a brotherhood of idealistic young Irishmen committed to independence from Great Britain, unquote. Joseph Murphy was 20 years old when the Fenian uprising occurred. Although he was not directly involved, his name ended up on a list of rebels, and if found, these rebels would be executed. From here, he went into hiding until he was able to book a steerage passage to America. He arrived at Castle Garden in 1870. He worked at various candy factories along the East Coast before heading west. And on November 6th, in 1876, he became a United States citizen while living in Chicago. By 1879, he was in St. Louis working at the Dunham Coconut Factory. There he met the young Margaret Switzer. This is the daughter of Margaret Morgan and Michael Switzer that we had talked about at the beginning of the episode. They were married on February 2nd, 1881 at St. Lawrence O'Toole Church. Joe was 34 and Margaret was 17. Margaret's brother, Frederick, also worked for the Dunham Coconut Factory. His job was to sell candy from carts on the street near the riverfront. Joseph and Margaret moved into a flat in the Carey Patch not far from Margaret's family. The Carey Patch was the Irish part of town. It was a very rough and poor neighborhood and was located on the near north side of the city. And for years, it was the only place that Irish immigrants were allowed to live. So the exact details of the next part of the story are kind of just lost to history since no one knows exactly who hatched the plan. But Joe and Margaret Murphy and her brother Fred Switzer decided to go into candy business. Joe knew the ins and outs of making candy, Fred knew how to sell it, and Margaret knew the retail and accounting side from working in her mother's store. So they would make candy in their kitchen of their flat, and Joe would hit the streets peddling their goods. In 1884, they registered a company called Murphy and Switzer Candy. In 1886, they moved from making candy in their kitchen to a 5-story brick building at 11 North Main Street. Now it's called First Street, and the exact location would be in the middle of the Arch Lakes. Joe was the president, and Fred Switzer served as the vice president. Along came the Panic of 1893. It was an economic depression of epic proportions. 600 banks failed. The unemployment rate rose to 20%. 1,500 businesses closed during the first year. And Murphy and Switzer Candy went bankrupt. Luckily, the Kendrick brothers, Crawford and Charles, took over the candy plant and operated as part of the Interstate Candy Company. The Kendrick brothers were not the most noble of men and found themselves in trouble with the law. In 1895, they unexpectedly left town due to some money issues and illegal activity. In steps Sister Mary Ellen Switzer to save the company. The sister of Margaret Switzer, she had left home at 18 and married Martin Broderick. Together, they ran a horse trading business, and after a few years, Mary Ellen left Broderick and returned home. She used $2,000 of her own money to restart the company. Fred Switzer moved into a vacant building at 22 North Main Street with a new company name, M.E. Switzer Candy Company. Fred Switzer was made president of the company. Joseph Murphy found himself no longer head of a candy company or employed. He borrowed some money from a friend and set up his own shop on Pine Street selling crystallized balloon candy. This venture barely lasted a year. So in 1896, Joseph Murphy and his family moved to Winthrop, Massachusetts. There he obtained a job with the candy factory, and the family bought a 2-story frame house on the beach. What a change that must have been. A good one, though, going from living in a cramped slum of a city to a house on the beach with fresh air. Anyway, back to the story. The new Switzer Candy Company back in St. Louis could sell the heck out of the candy. The problem was they didn't know how to make it without Joe. So Fred went to Massachusetts to talk Joe into returning. He was not successful. Joe said no. Joe and his family moved to Tennessee, where Joe took a job with the National Biscuit Company. The Switzer Candy Company was doing well, selling a variety of concessions such as caramels, licorice, butterscotch, and molasses-based candy. But Switzer was still looking for something to make his company stand out from the others. He purchased the formula and equipment from Walter Candy to make Yellow Jackets. It's a honey-flavored candy. They were an immediate hit. A division of the company was formed, Switzer's Yellow Jacket Company. But Switzer still wanted something new for the company, something that could withstand the heat and humidity of nasty St. Louis summers. So Fred approached Joe one more time about coming back to the company and helping him out with this new candy idea. This time, Joe said yeah, and he developed the Buttermill, a combination of butterscotch and caramel. By now, the Switzer Candy Company excelled in selling and moving products. They had developed a system of jobbers, or salesmen. These men bought the candy from the company at a reduced price and sold it to retailers in a markup. This developed into a distribution center that soon included raw materials to make honey. Switzer even created a nationwide incentive program for his jobbers. So the Switzer family had lived under one roof in a middle-class neighborhood. This changed when bachelor Fred Switzer married Elizabeth Kern. The couple moved into a large house in Kirkwood at the corner of Argonne and Woodbine. They would go on to have 5 sons and 3 daughters. In 1909, the Murphy family moved to Webster Groves. Now, the Murphy and Switzer families may have been in business together, but they were not equal. Ever since that split up when Mary Ellen came back to save the company, things just never went back to being the same. So the Murphys continued to create new candy, and the Switzers continued to sell it. But there was an unease in that relationship. The Murphys were a middle-class family that ran production. The Switzers were an upper-class family that ran and owned the company, the employers of the Murphys. This would continue to be the way as new generations of Switzers and Murphys joined the company. In 1911, the company moved to a new building at 612 North Main Street. It covered 60,000 square feet of space, providing ample room for production of even more types of candy. With 5 floors and windows on the front facade, the solid brick walls allowed for advertising space. The following year, Switzer Candy bought Jim City Licorice, a company from Dayton, Ohio. They moved all the licorice machinery to their new St. Louis plant and began a whole line dedicated solely to licorice. This year also introduced a new generation of Murphy men to the production line, Francis and Bernard. In the 1920s, Switzer began advertising on a national level, and in the 1930s began using radio advertisements. The 1930s also saw the organization of labor within the Switzer plant. The United Candy Workers organized 125 Switzer employees. The union negotiated a 40-hour work week, 10% wage increase, overtime, and almost a week of paid vacation. Then came the Great Depression, and it hit St. Louis hard. Unemployment in the city peaked at 35%. But the candy business was spared. It almost seemed that the demand for candy grew. During World War II, the first thing rationed was sugar in the spring of 1942. Butter and dairy products would join the ration list in 1943. This made candy production kind of difficult. However, the main ingredients for making licorice were still widely available. So Switzer Candy changed all production lines over to licorice. They retooled and remodeled the entire factory. The company name was changed to Switzer Licorice Company. In the 1930s and 40s, many of the first generation began to pass away. First, Joseph Murphy in 1932, and then Margaret Switzer in 1944, and Fred Switzer in 1949. The company was still run by family. John Switzer was the new boss and president, and cousin Francis Murphy served as the plant manager. In the 50s, the Switzer Company began to modernize. They updated their packing and advertisement. In 1959, they introduced the cherry licorice. I know, the real licorice is black licorice and cherry licorice is just a licorice type candy that's flavored. I know. So in the 1960s, the company was still doing well, but there was no real plan of succession for the next generation. It seemed like no one was able to or wanted to take over leadership. On October 16, 1966, Switzer merged with the Beatrice Food Company. The St. Louis factory would become a division of Beatrice. John and Joe Switzer remained in their positions, but reported to Beatrice. Here's where things kind of started to go downhill. In 1970, Beatrice gave the job of Switzer general manager to executive president Bob Kill. There was a misunderstanding of the terms of the merger. Switzer thought they were to operate as usual, and Beatrice expected Switzer to use the merger as a chance to make improvements and increase sales. John and Joe Switzer retired soon after Bob Kill arrived at the St. Louis plant. Kill did improve sales, but the old Switzer building wasn't up to par to meet his production expectations. So in 1972, they opened a second factory at 1600 North Broadway. It had better facilities and a warehouse. The newer equipment allocated for higher production levels. At this time, Bob Kill fired Frank Murphy, the last of the family in old culture working for the company. Beatrice still needed to cut production costs, so they changed the way licorice was made. The previous method took 3 days per batch. The new method, used by other companies called continuous extraction, took about 20 minutes. Changes to the process also meant changes from the original recipe developed for Joseph Murphy. At first, the change was not successful. It just didn't work. It was gloppy. It didn't taste right. So Beatrice hired Jim Clark, a former chemist employee of Switzer, to help them out. He improved the recipe to taste better and work better with the continuous extraction method. In 1977, the old Switzer factory closed. All production now took place at the plant on Broadway. In December of 1983, Beatrice sold all of its companies to a Finnish conglomerate. All North American companies operated under the Leaf name. In October 1996, the Finnish conglomerate sold all of the Switzer line to Hershey. Workers at the Switzer plant attempted to buy back the company, but to no avail. Hershey had its own line of licorice, Twizzlers, and decided to shut down the St. Louis plant and end the Switzer line. On May 15, 1998, the St. Louis plant on Broadway permanently closed, and the Switzer Candy Company came to an end. Or did it? In 2003, Michael Switzer, grandson of founder Fred Switzer, decided to bring back the name and candy. Michael and his brother Joe hired a lawyer to research claiming the Switzer brand and bringing it back to life. Legally, they could. If a company doesn't use a trademark for 3 years, it's considered abandoned per federal law. They were able to locate the original recipe, and a small company in Minnesota was willing to make their product. In 2005, Michael Switzer became business partners with Dan Warren. In the first 3 months of business, they had sold more than $2 million worth of product. By the end of the year, they had contracts with major grocery stores as well as Target and Kmart. They added some new flavors to the mix and brought back some of the original candy lines. Later that year, they received a cease and desist letter from Hershey. After a meeting with Hershey executives, the Switzers received control over the trademark. Although the plant is located outside the St. Louis area, the headquarters offices are now in downtown Webster Groves. Today, the company boasts 15 different flavors of licorice available in markets across the country. Their focus is to operate as a family business and not compete on the global market. And I'd like to end this episode with a quote from Candyman by Patrick Murphy. It's often the smallest things in life that mean the most. An aroma that claims a place in our memory and never leaves. A taste with the power to transport us back to our childhood. There's a certain silliness to candy. It's the most unpretentious of products. It claims to offer us nothing more than a burst of sweetness and the ability to make us smile. It's more fun to share than enjoy alone, and so it brings us together. How unremarkable is it that an enterprise so dedicated to such fragile little item could endure so many years through wars and depressions, changing taste, and the moods and temperaments of those who created it. The notion that a dream can be built upon candy is as strangely powerful as the fact that when it seemed to have died, it came back to life, bringing a touch of sweetness to our lives. Thank you for joining me today. You can find me at our website at showmehistorystl.com and on Facebook at showmehistorystl. Until next time, I'll see you in the loo.